Thank you so much for coming, guys. This is pretty awesome that you guys have all come out. I want to thank Kevin, Sean, and Adam for inviting me out. My name is Travis McCleery. I currently work at Netflix, and I'm actually from Columbus. I worked at Resource and gave a talk here about 2 plus years ago, about animations. First off, this right here, this topic is actually a joke. There will not be 10 ways to change your life, and it's actually going to be way better than that. So anyways, let's get started. Last time I was here, actually, I talked about animations, and I actually started off by talking about becoming a new father and how it impacted me as a designer. And the short and sweet of that intro was that I wanted to be proud of the work that I do, so my son Watson would in Taras be proud of the work that I do. So basically leading by example. So an update on him. He's a menace. He's 2.5 years old. He's full of energy and power. He also thinks he's an adult. So I'm super lucky to be a father because every day he's pushing me to do new things and learn on the fly. And right now at Netflix, I do a lot of stuff in the kids space. And I always look at what is the perspective of him as a user, but also me as a parent and my wife as a parent that is allowing our kids to watch the different types of content and interact with this app. So it's pretty awesome. But anyways, the second piece I want to talk about, this lady right here. This lady right here is actually my wife. We've been together for quite a long time. She's actually been with me since the very beginning of my design career. I started as a computer engineering major and then switched over to design. Through that process, we made that crazy little human being. And as we've gone from dating and then getting married and all this craziness, I've learned a lot from her, and she has a lot of these amazing qualities. But there's two of them that I want to bring up to you guys right now. The first one is craftiness. Now, Kate has attempted all kinds of different things, and in most cases, it's about just diving right in and trying to see what she could do. Now, this piece right here, she was watching Fantastic Mr. Fox and got inspired by Ash, this character. And what I thought was really amazing about it is that there's all different types of stitching and all different types of embroidery that is being done in here, both from like the sock and the hair and all this stuff. Now, it literally took her a couple days to output this thing, and I think that any of us to give thread and try to stitch this thing out would be impossible. And every time that she comes up with I want to do this thing, she gets full of this wonder and passion, and it's all about trying to figure out the best way, the best technique to do so. And this reminds me of when I first started out in design. I was full of that wonder and passion, but as I got further through my career, I started to plateau out and realized that I had created this tool set that I could go to really fast and build out things, which is pretty much generated by the agency environment. So if you get a project and you need to do something, you output it like that. But when you need to really take a step back and try to attack with new tools and new processes, it becomes a little bit more of a laborious process. And I want to step away from that feeling and go more into the feeling that Kate has brought, which is this open-mindedness and passion towards learning new things. Now, not only does this apply itself to the craft of stitching and making things, but it also applies itself to baking. Now, Kate and I were watching a show called The Great British Bake Off, or Baking Show, and she saw someone build this thing, which is called a brioche. It's about this big and that thick. It's layers and layers and layers of dough and filling and dough and filling. Now, she watched someone build this, and then immediately went to the kitchen and started trying to make it. And then output one, taste it, make another one, taste it, and test the different fillings, different types of ways to do the twisting and the patterns, and different types of egg wash, and just going on and on about this. And throughout the process, she's iterating and doing this. She's also looking for true and honest feedback from people. It's not just about, hey, test this, and you say, yeah, I like it, but what about it do you like? And kind of pulling in on that. And that is something that I've learned from her as well as feedback. Now, when I got started in design, it was quite difficult to figure out good and bad and the different types of process and layout and that sort of thing. And every time I would go and send it to her and say, what do you think? And I would get a range of different faces, and I want to show you guys these faces. So first one, I did something good, right? She's got a little bit of a smile there. Second face, I don't know what you're doing here. Maybe you're onto something. Or go back to the drawing board. This is the worst. But overall, what I think is really amazing about this is that every time that I put something in front of her, she is asking questions and looking at it from an eye that we don't look at. We're all designers and developers and a part of this field, and it's really great to get feedback from our coworkers and our counterparts. But also to get feedback from outside our group is really important. And I stress on going out and making those relationships, sharing with family, friends, parents, the whole bit. So you'll get insights into things that we as designers and developers do not take, we take for granted, actually. So I'm super lucky to be a part of this family, and they push me every day to be a better person and a better designer. So why do I share all this information? It's because I once was told when there's a class I took about giving presentations. And I was told that I needed to assert credibility in the first minute, that I needed to prove that I was a subject matter expert in the field of which I was talking about. But I can tell you that I'm not a subject matter expert in anything. What I am is passionate about design, and I'm passionate about growing and learning and becoming a better designer and a better person. And I'm really passionate about sharing that type of, all the stories that I can with all of you, in hopes that in turn that you will share those stories with other people and that you will get inspired to create awesome work. So, what are we going to cover today? Here's the list. I'm going to go through all these things, and then at the end we'll talk about the pieces and parts that I just discussed. If you have anything, feel free to raise your hand. I will answer any questions. So what the hell is prototyping? Well, if you go to Google, this is what you get. It's a pretty terrible explanation and definition. So a preliminary model of something, especially a machine, which other forms have developed or copy. That last part's pretty true, but it doesn't really apply to us as much. I really love this example here. The firm is testing a prototype of a weapon. Yeah. So it's really difficult when you go out and talk to people that are not in the tech field to say like, oh yeah, I'm working on a prototype, and they just like glaze over. They have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how many times I've been asked by family and friends like, what exactly is your talk about? And it's very difficult sometimes to actually indicate like, what is it that I am talking about? And I try to simplify this down to anything that we build that shows or indicates flow or interaction. That's what you're aiming for. And one of the best examples of this is a story that I was told when I started at Netflix. So Netflix and Nintendo have a great relationship. They were one of the main apps on the original Wii. And when the Wii U was coming out, they approached Netflix and said, hey, we want you to be on launch with the platform. Now, the first thing they asked was, do you have a developer kit? Do you have any assets? Do you have anything? And what they got was this.
And a runner on second. Hernandez is on the mound, and here comes the 3-1 pitch. Swing and a miss. 98-mile-per-hour fastball.
These are quite literally just snippets of what they thought the tool was going to do. They didn't give any indication of how much of this was actually going to be touchable or what was going to be accepted through the screen or what was going to be on the TV screen. It was literally just, this was a pitch that they gave out to different people to say like, this is what we think the Wii U could be, but we're not really sure what it's actually going to end up being. So they were left with this very hard challenge. One being the concept of a second screen. You're watching Netflix on your big TV and you have this screen below. And how do you interact with those two things? Not only that, having the soft screen here and then having these hard buttons on the edges. So when do you use the hard buttons versus the soft screen? And to get this kind of like actual knowledge, they needed to put it into people's hands. And they were really struggling trying to figure out how they could do that. So what they had was they had a 3D artist look at the video and create what they thought was the best representation of the actual remote. and then they slammed a Nexus tablet on the inside to indicate the actual like touchscreen element. They partnered this up with some awesome tech so that it would actually interact with the television back and forth. And they built out all these different types of scenarios that one would actually see something on the screen in front of them and see something on, and then they'd say like, okay, go select this movie on the far left or far right, or how would you attempt to do these types of things? And they went through all different types of processes. And what they found was that if you can give a little bit of context and a little bit of something that felt real and like had a feeling, that you could get past the sense that the stimulus wasn't really working and get into a place in which these users could give meaningful feedback to the people that were building the product. So this is a very complex process of designing, developing, and prototyping. But it helps with three main areas that I've found. One, it's complex problems that are very hard to like visualize. So if anybody here has developed an app from start to finish, you'll know that there's hundreds and hundreds of screens. So this right here is actually just one portion of a sign-up flow and a review process. And all this stuff over here on the left-hand side is how each one of these screens are connected to each other. There's over 50 screens, and this is just one portion of an app. So you can imagine how complex this gets over time. What's really great about this view here and being able to see it on your phone is that you get to see where the dead ends are, where static, wireframes lack. The second part is something that probably a lot of you guys have experienced with startup weekends, or if you've worked with any startup, is the concept of selling your idea. So if you're selling your idea to investors or you're trying to pitch that concept out, prototyping is amazing for that process. But it's also really great for pitching to your team members and getting buy-in from your surrounding team. So we're all visual learners, or most of us are, and having static screens and trying to say like, yeah, when someone presses this button, it goes over here, it has a lot left to the imagination. And you can kind of cut that down with this process. It also will allow you to cut down on cost long term because you can find the problems solved by the complex issues that stated before. Now, as you're going through and selling these concepts, it helps with facilitating different types of dialogue with individuals, whether it's PMs, the clients, your engineering partners. And it allows you to be able to get better at being able to talk about your work from a level that goes beyond just looking at statics. So for those paying attention, I have 2 out of the 3 trifecta for presentations. 1, definition of a word, 2, stock photo of a meeting, and 1 of a famous quote. And I mean, look at how ridiculous the stock photo is, guys. Why is there a bike here? I don't get it. And like, they're kind of like looking at the same thing, but not really looking at the same thing. And I don't really like this term, but like, this is like one of the most hipster photos I've ever seen on stock photo. So just don't use this kind of stuff in your work, please. It's just not good. Anyways, back on track. My favorite part of prototyping is actually getting the work into real users' hands. Now, it's very difficult, again, as I stated before, that if you were to just show somebody a Photoshop file or a sketch file like an end user and say, yeah, this is what it kind of looks like, and here's how they all link together, they'll look at you like you're crazy because there's no way they're going to be able to put these things together. Being able to hold something in your hand and actually interact with it and swipe through it is the best way to get meaningful feedback. So one of the hardest problems with prototyping is fidelity. Does anybody know what movie this is from? What is it? Yes, yes. If you haven't seen this, this is homework for tomorrow. Go and watch it and tell me what you think. All right, so there's 3 levels of prototyping that I've found over the years. Low, medium, high, pretty self-explanatory there. But what I found is that it's difficult to figure out where your project should fill into each one of these platforms. So let's go over them real quick. So low, no interaction whatsoever. So if you have static comps that you're printing out and looking at, or you're whiteboarding, anything that falls in on this side of the spectrum. On the other side, you have video. And in most of the cases, I think of things like if you're going to build out a keynote and you're exporting out a video, or if you're working in After Effects, that's where this comes in handy. This realm right here is really helpful and useful when you're inside a team environment. People that understand the process of building out products, this is useful because it's quick and fast, but it lacks the ability to like give it to a user and hold it in their hands. Now, in the early stages of when the iPhone was released and new devices released, they made these like plastic and cardboard cutouts to indicate what a screen looked like. And you would draw out and kind of slide pieces of paper in to get the feeling of what it was like, because not everyone had iPhones or the iPad. And this was, again, really great for the internal teams, but lacked when you went out to get real user feedback. Now with the tools today and where we're going with a lot of the newer prototyping, it really kills a lot of that concept and moves you into a realm where you can actually build products. So here, we're talking about stuff that's really just click through, very presentation-esque, to something that has a little bit more animation. I consider this to be the sweet spot for a lot of the work that we do here. It allows you to have limited investment into the project, to iterate quickly, and to build projects that people can use without having actually done any code. And the last one being the hide. This is primarily when you start walking into code territory. There's some software out there that can allow you to get a high prototype out, but it still has a lot more of a learning curve. So I put this as something that you have to have actual user input, whether it's like actually being able to type on a screen or being able to actually affect what's going on in the prototype, as well as something like real data. So for instance, with Netflix, if we wanted to pull in a user's account and be able to fill it up so that it felt like it was your account versus just something that was built from, for presentation standpoint. So there's a lot of variables that we can go through, and I could probably spend a whole talk talking about this point right here, but it comes down to what's the environment that you're in currently. I think of things like, what's the relationship between design and development? If it's great and you don't need to explain a lot, I've worked with great developers that I've just been able to like murmur out words and they go off and build it, versus where I've had a little bit harder time where I've had to like show them process over process and process. So depending on where you are in that relationship depends on what type of fidelity you're going to output. Also, what is your timeline and your project load? Do you have a lot more time to invest into a higher level of fidelity, or is it something that you need to get out the door next week? These are the type of variables that will determine what type of fidelity you're going to go towards, and will also indicate what type of tool that you go with. Now, we're in this crazy space right now of tools. This is obviously just a portion of the list, and it grows daily. And they fit all around that spectrum that I showed earlier. And it really is getting to the point where we can actually create and build in the same app. Right now, you're kind of leveraging Photoshop or Sketch or some kind of tool to create, and then importing your designs into one of these apps. And once one of these tools really corners that process, a lot of these will start to fall away. So instead of going through each one of these, I'm going to talk about the ones I think are most important and build them into each one of the fidelities. So on the far left, I have Sketch and Keynote. So Sketch for building out the process, but also it's really great for exporting artboards and being able to like give an indication of how things move along a timeline. And then Keynote, I was actually really surprised about this, that at Netflix, a lot of the designers use Keynote. And what they use it is a way to make quick ideas happen. So in most cases, we have templates and kind of a visual style guide all built into a Keynote, and you just drag and drop pieces and parts, which also like helps with the development process. But if you need to go a little bit further and you need to get this stuff into people's hands, my top three as it relates to medium is Envision, Flinto, and Principle. So Envision is amazing if you work with a larger team, if you need to get feedback from multiple key partners. Right now, they just recently bought, I believe, Macaw and a few other, I think Silver, and a few other prototyping tools, and I believe that the push is to move from a more static prototyping tool into something that you can actually create and build more robust prototypes. Once that happens, I think that these other ones will have a little bit of harder to sell. Now, Flinto and Principal are very close, and for those that are going to be in Brian's class, I think it's going to be great, and everyone should go and bug the hell out of him for how to use Principal. So the main difference between Principal and Flinto are based off of the animations. So Principal is timeline based. So if you use After Effects, or if you were an old school Flash person, this will work for you really well. If you're more of I'm at state A and I'm at state B, and how do elements switch between these two things, if that's the way your brain kind of works, then Flinto is great for that. But other than that, they're basically the same tools as it relates to building out robust prototypes. And the last one for the highest. Now with high, it's very difficult to talk about what is the ROI of like expending a lot of time, both design and engineering. Framer has been the best solution that I found so far because it allows a designer to learn the code as well as a developer to come in and clean stuff up. But again, it depends on how much time and effort you're going to be willing to put into something. So there's lots of resources online to look at. I'm going to talk about a couple that I think are really great. So this first one here, this tool right here, this is a blog post. A guy took this app that you're seeing over here on the right, and he's showing how it currently works. And then he took each one of these tools and built that same experience. Now he's done it with about 8 currently, and I believe he's going to be doing more. And he builds out each one, and he also shows what it looks like when it's running on the emulator versus what it looks like when it's running on the actual phone and the device. And what's great about this is you can kind of see where some of them fall a little short. But overall, if you look at this by the naked eye, just even from back there, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the actual app and what he created. It's really in the fine motions of animation and how the sliding goes back and forth that in some cases it's a little bit cleaner and a little bit smoother, or the bouncing is a little bit different. But that's all stuff that most users do not catch. So when it really boils down to is you look through what he wrote about the pros and cons of each one of these apps and find which one works best in your workflow. And that I'll be posting the links to this into the Slack channel and all the other places that the Columbus Web Group is at. This is another one, a website by Cooper. It is all a list of all the different prototyping tools, and it breaks it down by speed, fidelity, sharing, user testing, support, mobile and touch, and dynamic elements, and breaks them down here. And what you can do is actually go through this whole list if you want, but if you have a specific need, you can actually filter out each one. If you need something for desktop and you need to be able to share it with multiple people and you don't want to pay for it because you're cheap ass, then you can go and do it this way. And each one of these you can click into and actually get real feedback on how someone used it and what are the pros and cons. Now, those are really great for kind of weeding out which ones you want. But when it boils down to it, you really need to start talking to people that have actually used the tool, whether that is online or in person. I opt for in person to build those relationships because you're going to find out what those pitfalls and what were the success aspects of the project and beat that learning curve real fast. Another part to this is the type of leverage that we have as creators on these tools. The guy on the left is Nathan. He's one of the co-creators of Flinto. Really nice guy. I reached out to him on Twitter, I believe, and said, hey, I'm looking at using Flinto. Can you give me some tips? And he actually offered to come to the office and give us some insight and answer all of our questions. So for 30 minutes, I had the guy that created the app in my office giving me the insight to the tool, which was awesome. And what I found out at the end, he was asking us, how can he make the app better? How do we use it in our workflow? What could he change? What kind of features could he add? And at that point, I realized that we as creators have so much leverage over how these tools are going to be created. Because not all that list that I showed you earlier are big names like Adobe. There are a lot of people, smart people like Nathan, that are building these apps. And they want to know how to make it easy for you to create new things. So how do I bring this into my current workflow? It's actually really simple. Most of you guys work in this flow already. It's brainstorm and then go into design and get feedback. I just interject the prototyping in between my feedback. So if once I get a little bit further down the design process, I start trying to figure out what fidelity I'm going to tackle this in and bring it into one of those prototyping tools, and then get that feedback. And I just loop back. So if it's something about animations, I go back to the prototyping tool. If it's something about design, I'll wrap back into design. If it just blows up, it blows up, and I start back at square one. So as I pointed out earlier, this is the best part, in my opinion, about actually building these prototypes, is getting user feedback. But famous quote, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. If you ask people what they want, they'll say more features at a cheaper price, keep more of the same. So instead of going to somebody and asking what they want, present what you want to build, and then get feedback from that space. But a horse with a jetpack would be fucking awesome, by the way. Just want to point that out. Now, depending on where you work, you may have access to user testing, whether it be in kind of a rented out space where you have actual participants and you're behind glass and you get to do that. In other places, you don't get that luxury. At previous places that I worked at here in Columbus, I leveraged a lot of going into different departments of people that I didn't know and saying, hey, can you try this? Don't say anything about what you're building, what are the expectations, anything. Just sit there and hand it to them and let them play with it. When they hit a wall, ask them what they expected to hit, what do they expect to happen once they make that decision to click. Or if they seem frustrated, just kind of probe on it and let them talk. Sit back and listen and watch and see how they use the app. That is the most important piece, is how they use and what are they thinking as they're making decisions. So if that doesn't work, you can also go down to Starbucks, buy someone a coffee and say, here, can you try, kind of get 15 minutes of your time, and just start this conversation. If not there, you can, again, like I said, family, friends, your parents. Leverage all the people that you know outside of your normal daily work to get feedback. So what I've had problems with in the past with going to different presentations, which is the idea that, like, let's say we're talking about responsive design, and you get told like all these amazing things about how responsive design is amazing and how you need to implement it as soon as you go home. And then you're like, how the hell do I get my team on board and actually invested in the process? Well, I find that it's actually good to learn the tools, start implementing it into your workflow just here and there. Start sending out resources to your team and say, hey, did you check this out? What do you think about it? Start kind of planting that seed for the process, and then prove its worth. Don't say, we need to implement this with no actual proof or backing. You need to actually apply it to the work you're doing and prove that it has some value in the workflow. Once you have your surrounding team invested, get a leader to get invested in and actually go around the rest of the company and buy into this concept of prototyping or like different tools that you want to use. It's much easier than you think it is, but you have to prove its value before you go in. So that was a lot of stuff, very quick, and I want to go through the things I think are important. 3 really easy things to digest. First, get your work in front of real people. Second, understand which fidelity is right for the job, depending on the project. And lastly, continue to push yourself, continue to push others, continue to push the tools, continue to push the process. The more that we push at it, the better that these things will come out. Even 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, this stuff didn't even exist. And you looked at that screen with all those different apps. We are the ones that push those people that create those apps. We are the ones that create the apps for the end user. So just keep on pushing. You have a bunch of amazing people in this room. Start making those relationships and talk and get better at this process. So story time. I have 2 projects that I want to share with you and how I used prototyping for these projects. I'll answer any questions as it relates to the project, but I really want to hammer on why we used prototyping to get through the process. So the first one is the Bread Approved mobile app. Bread Approved is a website that allows users to rate accessibility for hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues. When I built it with Brett, we actually made a responsive website that worked well on mobile, but not ideal. There was still that was left that we didn't get a chance to tackle. And our target audience is actually people that are in chairs and people that have disabilities. So being able to use your dexterity with your hands is actually quite difficult at times. So trying to make something that could work both for the target audience, native build, and something that would actually perform a little bit better than the website. Brett had been offered a chance to go into Dublin, Ireland to pitch Brett Approved and to get investors. And he asked me to build this app. So what I did was I actually used Flinto to build this app really quick. And as I went through it, I tried to figure out what are the flows and what are the fidelities that I'm looking for. So for knowing that this was going to be set in front of investors, I wanted to make it so that it was more visual heavy and less on animations. So as you saw right here, this tapping, that's just hotspots for progression through the app. I faked this searching screen with just a handful of screens, so I didn't have to do any dev work on that. And then I made these long script scrolls, being able to put in restaurants and things that were around the area to even make it feel more real, but it was all still static. So this is the process of actually submitting a review for the hotel that we were staying at. You have the ability to take a photo, and I simulated flash and everything just inside this prototyping tool to, again, when you're holding it, the smoke and mirrors of it removes the doubt that this is a real thing. Now, knowing that it was investors, I made it super linear. I have the way to go back and forth, but it was really about being able to tell a story from point A to point B. So this part right here is just actually giving the rating for the actual location. And at each point, it gives you this affirmation that you're going through the process and sending information up to the cloud. Here was a way to make it easier for people with dexterity issues and people that didn't want to go over the hurdle of writing out a full review. So we built out sentences that said the sidewalk was blank, and then they could type in what they thought, kind of like a Mad Lib experience. And that, at the end, they could review all the things they submitted, and then they're back at square one. Now, the other trick of this was that there was going to be voice communication. So I actually just leveraged the iOS visuals to be able to indicate where someone was inside the app, and they could talk to the app. Now, we didn't have the ability to code that out, but I could at least talk to it to some degree and say, this is what we have in mind. And it goes into each one of the sections. So you want to take a picture, you take a picture, and then you would hold it up and say 1, 2, 3, and then we take the picture. Now this was built in probably about a week and a half of both design and building inside the prototyping tool. It was also shared out to multiple devices so that our investors, Brett and I, while we were out on the floor, could show people this in hand, which was great for the sharing component. Now I want to talk about something that is more recent. This is a project I worked on at Netflix. It's Kong, King of the Apes. And it's a kid's show that basically has a new experience in what we call PostPlay. So PostPlay is actually this.
Battle on.
Here we go. Technical difficulties, guys.
Battle on.
Nope. Well, anyways, so postplay is when you're at the end of an episode and you're going to go into the next episode and the credits roll off screen. As they roll off screen, you have a synopsis of the next episode that you're going into and the little box. Every one of you guys that have used Netflix has seen this type of experience. It's ubiquitous across all the platforms and used in all cases. Now, the idea that we wanted to do was be able to have something that felt more engaging from when you're leaving one episode and rolling into the next episode. So we built out this new experience for kids to test out the idea of moving from one point to another. And this is what we did here.
Battle unlocked. Bugging out. Kong versus Robosquitos.
So as you watch the
Prepare
show,
Kong
you
for
actually
battle.
unlock content, these two pieces of gear.
Jetpack.
And as you unlock that, you also unlock a battle. So at the end of the episode, you can choose between A or B, the Kung Fu or the jetpack, and then it loads a 30-second video of the character from the show, Kong, fighting off one of the enemies from the show itself. So obviously they're absolutely ridiculous. but they fit really well with the show and they fit really well with the target audience. So Kong lost. Sad day.
Kong retreats. Pick what's next.
And then you are dropped back into the standard post-play experience
Next
where you have the ability to
episode.
go in the next episode, or you can go and try
Watch
again with the
battles.
other ones here. So what we found through user testing is that this is actually really engaging. It's a sense that the kid has a choice of what happens at the end of an episode. And these videos are very short and supplemental content that is built in. And it's not something super complex. There is literally a win and a lose video every single time. And you unlock those two pieces of gear guaranteed as you watch the show. It's more about continuation of the love of the character, the love of the story, and keeping people engaged as they roll through the series. Yay, Kong wins.
Kong wins. Pick what's next.
So-
Next episode.
This actually,
Watch
this
battles.
process went through
Next
each one of the
episode.
fidelities. It started out in Keynote as a wireframe that we were just trying to figure out how this would actually work in the process and the flow. Then it moved into Flinto and Principal to figure out what are the actual animations that we wanted to use. In this case, we did not share this with users at any point during that process. Moving into step 3, we actually had engineers come in and build out a prototype that we could actually use to get in front of users, both in mobile and on a 10-foot experience on a gaming console, as well as on site, to get a wide variety and a wide range of feedback. So, that is all I have to share with you guys today. Oh, yeah. Sorry again for the technical difficulties, but again, thank you for everyone that came out and has shown interest in this community. I think it's really amazing, so please keep on doing that, and I will take questions now. Yes?
Is this thing on right now on Netflix? Am I missing it?
No, it is. Sorry. Yeah, so it's I wouldn't call it a game. It's still just a choice. Yeah, so it's currently it's only for this show. So for Kong King of the Apes, it's something that is available. So.
Sorry for the Google search question.
No, you're fine. Yeah. So right now it's actually something that's out in test. There's multiple A/B cells that are going out, and once it gets productized, it will move into other TV shows. Anything else? Question? Yes.
So like one of the great debates that we end up having a lot is, I don't think this works. Oh yeah, it does. Is when to use these different levels of prototypes, but when building something from scratch and trying to get to like your MVP or enter your TLA, when does it make sense to use this? The thing that we get asked a lot is about timing and how much you have to dedicate to create some of these prototypes as opposed to designing more static things or things on the I guess number one, the lower level area of that prototype fidelity. To move higher up, you obviously have to dedicate some more time. So just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I actually bypassed the MVP question. So for people that don't know, minimal viable product, that's just getting something out the door so that people can use it. So the difference, the line I kind of draw between these kind of talks, between prototyping and MVP is obviously like, are you talking about production level code that's going to be, a user's going to actually use, versus something that just indicates what the experience could be done. So like you wouldn't use Framer to actually build something that would go live inside the iOS app store, right? The process of actually deciding when it should go out or when you should start putting in the different levels of prototyping is obviously very dependent upon your environment. But personally, I feel like it's, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it a large, chunky, like sign up flow all the way to the end, or is it something smaller? And that can kind of dictate when to bring it in. I actually say go with medium about most of the time throughout the process. Because again, it's very low effort to actually build out. If a designer is building out each one of the screens, it's literally just importing those screens into the tool and just giving like some indication of movement, which is really great. Now, when you're talking about like something that's on the higher end, that's when it gets a little bit questionable if it's useful to your team or to your product. Because if you already have a code base that's already there, you can actually leverage a lot of what's already there and then just build on top of it instead. My whole thing with that is that I don't want someone to go and build like a high-level prototype with production-level code, and then you find out from user feedback that half of it doesn't work or is not necessary, and then you talk about going back to square one. So aim for a lower fidelity, and then depending on what type of feedback you're looking for, you can adjust from there.
So I have a question about user testing and when that comes into play when working for a client.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of like, we're actually experiencing this right now in the work that we're doing. So that balance between presenting to a client and getting sign off on that design and then user testing it,
mm-hmm.
because in our user testing, we're kind of like backtracking on already approved designs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just like, or the other way around would be user testing something that the client in the end like doesn't approve of.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do you kind of work around that?
It's a great question, a very tough one. I think it depends on your relationship with the client in that case. If you have a good relationship with the client, you can go and do the user testing first and then present the feedback and the findings that you've made and then go through that process. And it kind of gives you a little bit more leverage in that space when you're kind of pitching. But I'd say that you kind of want to get buy off on an earlier stage. If you're talking about just like showing static comps, you can kind of get by with that process and say, the next phase of this project is actually we're going to make a prototype and get it in front of users' hands and then come back to you and make adjustments from there. That's been kind of my best route so far. Again, it's really dependent upon who your client actually is.
So prototyping for something that is currently existing, have you ever had to overcome kind of the stigma of the users? You're getting the kind of feedback where the user's just unhappy that it's something they've never seen before.
Yeah.
And they didn't like what they used to have.
Yeah.
And how do you separate the feedback that you can use from that versus just needing them to get over the fact that it's different?
Yeah. So two things. One, sometimes with Netflix, you actually have the opposite because you have so much brand love. People will just say they love it no matter what, and it's really hard to get that type of feedback. And what we also have found is that people will say things like, I really love documentaries and crazy dramas, right? But then when you look at the actual viewing habits, they're watching reruns of The Office and things that are more what I guess we consider like lowbrow, right? But it's what we say we want and what we actually want end up being two different things. So in most cases, when we're in that point where someone's kind of riffing off saying like, I liked what I had before, start to probe of why they liked the previous state and kind of try to separate what their comments are coming from. Because in most cases, I mean, look at when Facebook made updates to the stream, there was riots, no matter what, anytime you make an adjustment, people will give you negative feedback. And with qualitative kind of conversations that you have, it's not taking one person's word as like gospel as it relates to the rest of the project. It's really figuring out what are the pros and cons and trying to weed through it. It's actually quite difficult, but as you kind of build through, or if you have good partners in that user research state, you'll get better at it.
Can you talk to some of the challenges or differences between designing within the context of an agency, like resource and working on software and developing an application or native app, but then there you don't have the timelines that you do where you're dedicated to a platform like Netflix. So it's almost 180 degrees sometimes, it seems like, in terms of a fight.
So I'm actually pretty lucky. There's quite a few people in here that worked on a project with me for Sherwin-Williams, where the original pitch was to build an Android app. And it was actually supposed to just be a skin of the current existing app and make it feel like it was like Android-esque. Now, at the time, we didn't have a lot of prototyping tools available, but what I did leverage was the awesome engineers that I had and a little bit of After Effects. And the process that I went through was I went back to the team and said, look, we can't do this project the way that it's been pitched. We need to really build something that makes sense for the platform and then scale it from there. make something that is worth actually building, basically. And I pitched it to them, I got buy-in from that team, and then I pitched it to the client and said, look, here's the reasons why you need to do this. I showed them all the awesome stuff that was on Google I/O the previous year of material design and why you build a certain app a certain way. And then got their buy-in to actually build a from-scratch experience. Then went out and designed that experience, prototyped with these guys, made it work, went back to the client, and actually through that process, they were extremely pleased with the process. They ended up deciding that they wanted to do the iOS app in tandem with the project. And it was through that proof of, this is what you need to do, not what you asked us, but what you need to do. So to answer the question of how prototyping affected that process, it was more about engaging with my engineering partners and saying, like, showing them an existing app and saying, I want something that looks like this. Can you do that? And then them go and build it, and then back and forth. At that point, we were still building within inside iOS's, the SDKs and Android's state, and it was just a lot of back and forth. And then when we hit a wall, I would just open up After Effects and kind of lay it out. Anything else? Brian.
The microphone's for the video, not for us.
So using these prototyping tools, I know working on a video streaming platform, things like Flinto and After Effects can handle video. But if you're working in like InVision or Principal, how do you circumvent that barrier?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And was one of the first things we actually asked Flinto to implement was actually the ability to do video into the process. So we do ask for that throughout the process, or for the tools that we actually use. But as it relates to InVision and some of the other ones, what we do is we talk about little slivers of interactions where we can just leverage static and say, we know that this is actually video playing in the background, and we have the concept of that, and the team is kind of on board with it. But in most cases, we want to leverage something that actually can use video. Thank you very much.
I have a question for you. What is your honest thought about prototyping with web technologies, HTML, CSS, JS, rather than these other tools?
Yeah. So I didn't cover this as well in the presentation, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that these tools are really great for designers or people that don't know how to code. And it really removes a lot of that stress of trying to figure out how to do it. But I do urge people to learn that process because it will only make the projects better. If you can prototype and you know how to write some clean CSS and HTML, go for it. It's going to be better in the long run because you won't be tied down to whatever the tool can actually do, and there's ways to work around it. But for those people that don't know how to do that, it's really great. And I'd say another process is use something like Framer, where you actually have both design and development at hand, and you can learn as you go along. And then if you feel comfortable, go into that tool. When it boils down to it, it's really what can you leverage. As I kind of showed that video before, almost all those tools can output the same thing. It's what are you going to feel confident in being able to output, great work. So one more question.
Great job. I know a lot about prototyping since I work at InVision, but one question that I have is speed, right? So I talk to a lot of companies. Prototyping is, obviously a big core of it. Everything you talked about is like spot on. So in your experiences, rapid prototyping, staying in that medium space that you talked about in Fidelity and going quick, do you see more success in prototyping when you're moving fast, iterating quickly versus going to like fidelity and making high fidelity kind of a priority, or is it kind of a mix of both for you?
Yeah. So it's very dependent upon what your aim is. If the aim is to just build a product inside your group, go through and stay in that medium, that sweet spot, and being able to move fast is key, and being able to iterate quickly. So if I go start something on Monday, I present it on Tuesday, I get feedback, I can get something out the door on Wednesday or Thursday, and then I've jumped 3 different versions by the time I hit Friday. That's extremely important. But as it relates to being able to get the critical user feedback, spending a little bit more time and effort and making it feel as real as possible is actually more important in that case. So if you have the time and the goal is to actually go in front of a user, spend a little bit more time making it polished. I think it will go a lot longer for you getting actual meaningful feedback. But yeah, anyways, thanks guys.